and then I'm going to switch gear and just talk through some key applications, some changing patterns, and we'll kind of wind up with majorly a demo-driven content presentation today. So as I go along, if a particular service or a feature kind of struck out to you, feel free to ask questions or raise your hand, and we can dive into that a little deeper. So having said that, I'd imagine if you've considered Office 365, or if you're on board already, chances are you picked Office 365 or you're using it in one of these features, right? It's by and large, the majority two use cases that we see is either customers trying to get off of on-premise Exchange onto Office 365 Exchange Online platform, or it just streamlines desktop Office licensing, and they find value in subscribing to Office 365 Enterprise E2 licensing just for the Office licensing side of it, or it's for Skype for Business. And beyond that, it's kind of like once you're on a new platform, you got the maximum return of investment on your immediate goals, and that's kind of how it stops. But if you look beyond, you'll see every other week there's new features being added, new release highlights, and the biggest confusion is not so much of how do you utilize new features, but just making sense of it all. So I want to talk initially about what's the vision, right? What's the driver for the changes in the platform, and where are we headed, right? What's the future? So as you commit to an app or a feature or a service in Office 365, you can kind of triage yourself if that's the right move. Where's Microsoft headed? There is a pattern of unification of services in Microsoft, and that can cause some pains as far as training efforts or just assigning resources on making sure your users are up to date with the content, right? But at the same time, of the tools that you are using today, do you want to make sure that you are utilizing it to its fullest extent? Just as an example, obviously we've all used Office products, but what you may not realize is now that you are using Office 365, preferably through a connected account with your Office 365 work account and linking Office to it, you automatically gained a whole bunch of new capabilities within your existing Office products. One of the key items that always surprises people is the ability to now share documents or PowerPoint presentations or worksheets directly from your Office product onto your a SharePoint platform or OneDrive, or just plain emailing without downloading and re-uploading documents and going through a set of systematic steps that you may be used to today. So we'll look at a little bit of stuff like that on just how already, just from signing up with your Office 365 account, how your Microsoft Office products are enhanced for a better collaboration space. And typically, the most value here is simply in your ability to open and save documents directly from the cloud without having to download and caching it onto a local system. And also, from a security perspective, there is enhanced capabilities as far as restricting documents. So if you're not interested in keeping a local copy, but if you would like to keep it encrypted, there's built-in restrictions and encryption capabilities. If you're interested in using DLP mechanisms to make sure that as you're authoring documents and uploading information, it does not contain credit card information, social security numbers, that kind of thing, and how it all works together, right? So within the products that keep in mind that there might be new capabilities that you may not be taking advantage of. But beyond that, what's the future, right? What's with all the changes, and what are some of the new applications that's popping up, and kind of what's the driver for it? And this is perhaps the biggest question I get as we talk to customers on Office 365 and the Microsoft Cloud Platform in general. So this is like a picture representation of some of the products that you may have heard of. And I got that from, I think, Microsoft Showcases during their Dynamics 365 unveiling. And this kind of, I think, sets a good picture of what's going on. So when you think about Office 365 or Microsoft Cloud Platform, you may have heard of Microsoft Azure, perhaps when you were initially setting up your directory synchronization or setting up identity authentication authorization kind of thing. Azure is kind of the foundation for all Microsoft Cloud initiatives. Office 365 sits on top of Azure and shares a lot of underlying foundational features such as authentication, authorization, federation, and some of the security side of the story with Azure. And it's kind of powering the whole platform from bottom up. On top of Azure, we can look at what I'd like to call a platform or a foundation for your data and connectivity options. So you may have heard of Power Apps or Power BI. What it really translates to is, now that you're on the Microsoft Cloud Platform, which is Azure, here's my application platform, which is comprised of my data models, my databases, connected to my on-premise data systems, and how that can be laid out. And sitting on top of that is services that we're familiar with, such as Office 365 and its umbrella of services underneath that. Now, keep in mind, as we say Office 365, there's perhaps not a clear definition of what technically falls under Office 365 umbrella, because you could say Power BI is part of Office 365, but at the same time, it isn't. You can sign up for Power BI independently. You can also sign up for Dynamics 365, but think of it more from a licensing standpoint. Office 365 is just the platform where you can manage the show, right? So Office 365, Power BI, and some of the Azure enhancement features like Cortana, Internet of Things, are the services that's being built on top of it. Dynamics 365, for instance, is a separate service, but since it's hosted on top of Azure and the Azure security platform, the same credentials that you use to log into Office 365 has a seamless integration with Dynamics 365. Now, this is important because as we look to the future, the Microsoft goal is not to create a monolithic platform that does everything, but instead, the goal is to create granular applications targeted at key features or key use cases, and connecting one app with the other on a common data platform, and keeping a modularized set of applications for both Microsoft officially supported applications and as well as third-party business applications. Now, what does that mean to you? First off, if you've not explored this already, you may have heard of the Microsoft Office App Store, which is an app store where you can download add-ins and components for your Microsoft Office products and SharePoint Online. What's been recently unveiled is the Microsoft App Source, which is essentially a platform where you can integrate pre-built business applications directly into your Dynamics 365 or Office 365 ecosystem. And the best example for this is Dynamics CRM, the official Microsoft sales, marketing, and customer relationship tool, has now been kind of decentralized into individual apps. So Dynamics CRM is now Dynamics 365 with sales, marketing, customer service, and operations as app offerings within the 365 umbrella. So as you can see, kind of how the big monolithic applications for Microsoft is slowly being broken down into a common set of foundational applications. More importantly, as third-party vendors are warming up to this new model, you'll increasingly find new apps being released that technically can be downloaded based on the same platform on the Office 365 model. So as a quick example, I just want to show you how it could look like in your environment today. If you have explored your Office 365 Power Apps or Power BI application areas, you may have seen links to download additional applications. And this is kind of what I see when I go into the App Source area. And under here, there's several categories and industries. It's still, I'd say, relatively new as more applications are being built in. But you can already see there are key applications here where you can pick one from here, add it to your Office 365 platform, and it shows up as just another app on your central Office 365 area. So all the apps that you see here can be integrated by third-party business applications. So I just want to make sure that we're clear on where we're headed as far as the decentralization model and how the concept of Office 365 is now being broken down into individual apps built on a common foundation. And we'll explore more key components of it as we go along. And the new approach for building customization. So as we know, the Office 365 platform in itself is a platform. It's not specifically designed to solve your problem. So the thought process is you're going to use what's available out of the box, stitch them together to solve unique business problems without a lot of infrastructure overhead that you may have experienced in the past. And a key part of this is using Power Apps, Microsoft Flow, and also to a certain extent Power BI. And I figured, since we were going to talk about maximizing Office 365 beyond email, right? I figured this is a good place to start, and I'll show you a quick demo. But real quick, Microsoft Flow, think is not a replacement necessarily, but it's a new workflow engine for Microsoft that is kind of like a common workflow pattern for both SharePoint, Dynamics, and what we can imagine would be future Microsoft products as well. So if you look at each product in isolation, right? SharePoint has always had its own workflow engine. It's pretty good at what it does. It's approval workflow and can connect to lists and external content types within the SharePoint space. And it acts as confined approval engine or a workflow engine, but it can only be used within SharePoint. But if you look at Dynamics CRM, well, it had its own workflow engine, which can only be used within the Dynamics CRM engine. But workflow as a concept is a common requirement across any type of enterprise or business applications. So the whole workflow engine and the integration model has now been broken out into its own offering, which is Microsoft Flow. And Microsoft Flow can connect to SharePoint Online, Dynamics CRM, and presumably any other future product. The next logical question then is, now that I have a workflow engine and I've got all my data and other information in the Office 365 space, well, how can I create a customized view or a customized application to solve my unique problems? Now, depending on what you're trying to do, perhaps it's as simple as making a small modification to an existing product, or you may want to tie in a bunch of stuff together into an easy-to-use format. And that's where Power Apps come in. Power Apps allows you to, with or without Microsoft Flow, connect to all Office 365 services, since they're now all part of a common data platform, also through the new Graph API, and also using the connectors and gateways, or using the Enterprise Gateway connector, you can surface data that may be in your on-prem SQL Server all the way to a cloud application such as Power Apps, and even use that information to post it into a SharePoint list or into an Office 365 groups, or even send an email with information that's collected from multiple sources. And Power BI, as you may have guessed from the title, is the new business intelligence and visualization platform from Office 365 that we'll look in just a second. So having said that, now that you have a high-level overview of Power Apps and Microsoft Flow, let's take a quick peek at how that works. So I just logged into my Office 365 account, and This should be familiar to you. These are some of the out-of-the-box applications. You can add additional applications and kind of pin them here. But here's what I can see using my organization view. So automatically you can see there's a whole bunch of stuff here that may not be familiar to you, such as the new Stream service, Microsoft Teams, Microsoft Forms, which is still in preview, and a bunch of other things. So let's look at Power Apps. That's probably the most interesting item. So as I click on Power Apps, it's taking me to this area, and the top left-hand side, it says create a new app. Now that seems kind of scary because this might be the platform for end users, and it's kind of garnering that anyone can just come up here and create an app. It can be security controlled to an extent, but the vision here is if it's a simple need, and if you've got power users in your organization, empower them to solve minor problems that they may be having with some workflow productivity challenges using the model of Power Apps, where you don't really need a lot of programming experience, especially on the financing side. If you have surface data, chances are they know how to work with their data, and they can use that experience to solve their own problems. So we'll get into creating a new app in just a second, but you can see here how there are pre-made apps that's already available with some sample data. So this is kind of interesting. For instance, if I were to use the Contacts app, well, where does it get its contacts from, right? Or if you're trying to look at case management, where's it getting its data from? And how do we ensure that it works here? And there's some key ways to answer that question. One is, these are already pre-made apps with predetermined data sources that can be a dynamic CRM source, a SharePoint list, or a distribution list in Exchange Online. But at the same time, you may have noticed that I also have the Customize button, which means I can download a pre-made app or a template and hit the Customize button and connect it to my own data sources, add additional fields without having to go back to the vendor and figuring out, going through the whole change request cycle and everything, and going through that channel. So I want to try and open up a new template here. Give me just a second. So I'm going to use OneDrive for Business as my data storage for now. And what it's doing right now is making the connection for that particular application to store its data, which I'll show you in a second how we can change things. So there's a whole bunch of interesting things that's happening here right now. Keep in mind, we are going off of a template that's available on a common store. And you can create your own apps and surface it as a template. As I'm creating new and creating an application, it is automatically wiring up and building an instance of that template for my use case, which is important because the customizations that you make to your instance does not get reflected back on the template. So this is what I have right off the bat. And here's the designer, since I did click Customize. And this is what I get right off the bat. So this can be run right now, but obviously the data here is not going to make a whole lot of sense because these are just sample data. But what's interesting here is for each component here, I've got a data connector that I can add and configure it for my own use case. So this right here is just a simple string for now, but this information can come from a SharePoint list and connect it directly. So here's an example of an app that we were just playing around with internally. So we decided to just create an expense reporting app. And that's a fairly common use case. There are templates for it. But we decided to create one anyway. And we figured it needs, at a high level, the ability to submit, and if you're a manager, approve it, or if you're a user, see if your expense reports were approved, and just see a visualization of the expense reports that you submitted in the past. And I'm running it in the runtime view, so I'm not actually customizing it. So when I hit submit expenses, it's asking me for the approver, and I can add some metrics to it. And if there's a receipt photo, attach it and hit submit an item. And I'm going to submit it for approval. So hopefully that has gone through. Here we go. And the information here is being stored in like a SharePoint list that is handling the logistics of the app and the approval behind the scenes here. But what it boils down to is I've got an app that was created without any coding, directly using Power Apps, and is already talking to at least 2 different services on the Microsoft Office 365 platform, and I have the ability to customize it without a whole lot of pain. And that's kind of interesting because we just created essentially a new application for our own use based on some common data models. And I also want to just show you the app in an edit view so you can kind of see how we got to this model here. And you can see, if you don't like the gray background, you can change it. Since I'm an administrator, the changes that I make here can be reflected for everyone. So, I can make changes here and also work with how it, the visualization side, where it's being stored. If I would like to change the source of it, I can do that. And the application here in itself is compromised into pages. So that's the home screen that I'm looking at right now. Here's the browse screen for selecting and adding my expense line items. Here's a detail screen, and you're essentially building out each screens one by one. And you will notice that this application specifically was built for keeping a mobile platform in mind. So hence the vertical layout. But if I expect this application to be used on a Windows platform, where it's on the Windows 10 store, I can do that as well. And it's quite easy. I don't have to recreate the application into multiple instances for each platform. I can create it once, have it run on my mobile phone, iOS, Android, Windows, and also the web interface in one model, and use Microsoft Flow to connect things such as the receipt that or the expense report that I just added a while ago. I want it to be submitted onto a SharePoint list. Well, I can do that by using the Flow connector, or even have it kickstart a workflow if I'd like. Going back to a deck here, you can kind of see how we just use Power Apps, and I'll showcase more of Flow in just a second, but just use that to create a new model. And that's kind of the direction that Microsoft's headed in, which is divided into 2 verticals. One is Power Apps like platform where you can kind of make your own story. And the other is developers or third-party vendors can create more advanced line of business applications on a common model, so it's easy for you to effectively plug and play within your own environment. So let's we'll dive into more demos, but I just wanted to quickly run through some of the common products that's being used today. Keep in mind, I'm not showing any preview or upcoming releases. You may have already used some Microsoft Forms or other capabilities that's still in preview, so I'm not going to cover that. But I'm just going to run through some of the most commonly used Microsoft Office 365 apps or features, right? So Exchange Online, I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail. It's your email in the cloud, which I'm sure you're used to. OneDrive for Business, I'm not sure, is something, it's still kind of confusing for its intended purpose in some cases. So OneDrive for Business is the business side of OneDrive Personal, which is built into Windows 10 out of the box, and I think also to a certain extent Windows 8.1 as well. OneDrive for Business is the business side of the operations, where in the information stored in OneDrive for Business is automatically synced to your work account versus your personal account. And the biggest driver here is the 1 terabyte of cloud storage per user that it comes with. And it's free regardless of your Office 365 tier, right? That's quite a bit of storage, and an equivalent comparison to a traditional on-premise shop would be perhaps your My Documents folder or Active Directory personal folders. This is a direct replacement for it, not in terms of integration, but in its terms of use case. OneDrive for Business is kind of a multifaceted tool because it doesn't start and stop there. It's not just a Dropbox or Box-like tool. It also serves a dual purpose of offline synchronization for SharePoint document libraries as well. So if you've got a mix of personal or work-related items, but that you do not wish to share, that you like to store within your own security space, but you've also got other work going on in SharePoint document libraries that you'd still like to sync into your Office 365 from your Office 365 environment to your local computer, perhaps for offline reasons, or just want to use it, you'd still use the same OneDrive for Business model for that. Now let me show you quickly what that means. So I'm going to go back to my Office 365 platform. Now I'll talk about SharePoint in just a second, but just to demonstrate a use case here, I'm going to go into a SharePoint site here. And I'm going to just find a document library. And as I go to a library, any document library in Office 365, you're going to notice that it's got a sync option. When you click on this, it still says Get OneDrive for Business app, which is going to bring up my OneDrive for Business desktop client, and it's going to ask me to sign in, and then I can easily access my cloud resources as if they were stored in my local computer, complete with two-way synchronization and offline synchronizations as well. So I'm just going to sign in here. It opened up in my other monitor. So it's trying to sync now. It's asking me which library am I interested in syncing, and I think we are in the documents library here. It's being synced. And as I look at my local computer here, I've got a new environment here called SharePoint Finance Documents with a little tick symbol here saying that these are synced documents directly from a document library in Office 365. And the way I was able to do that is using OneDrive for Business, which is kind of cool for offline synchronization scenarios, and also familiarity for users who would like to see their content in like a Windows Explorer kind of environment. So pretty neat functionality, probably not as widely used as you'd think. Skype for Business, which I'm sure you're probably already taking advantage of. So I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail here, except that Skype for Business is deeply integrated into the rest of the Microsoft product portfolio. So you will notice instances of Skype for Business kind of interactions in other areas, particularly, for instance, here's the PowerPoint deck that I'm using here. And I can hit the share button and see if I can find Sarah here. There she is. And she's I can directly invoke a chat with her and have it bring up in my local Skype window here. So it's if you didn't have the Skype for Business app already installed, this you can still share, but the direct messaging feature would be disabled for you. So it's a kind of an interesting way how it automatically enhances an existing product for you. And I also mentioned right in the beginning how your existing Office portfolio products can be enhanced just because you used a Microsoft Work account to sign in here at the top here. I can share this document, which is currently being stored on a OneDrive for business storage, with someone else without having to upload or download the document all over again. And I've also got this capability to save this directly into my SharePoint store or my OneDrive for business storage locations here without ever leaving my Office product. So that's an interesting way how Skype for Business and a tool that you may already be using is enhancing other components as well. SharePoint Online is probably the value add software of it. And if you haven't used SharePoint in the past, SharePoint Online or SharePoint in general gives you the ability to create a central collaboration hub for all your departments, all your users, and share documents, create lists, create workflows, and really act as a launching pad for a lot of use cases, or a central hub that can connect to other features, not just in Office 365, but also line of business applications. Sarah did mention that we've kind of taken our first crack at creating an enhancement for Office 365. So we've created a product called Doc, which enhances a default SharePoint instance with an improved look and feel, predefined templates, and a really predefined set of functionality, forms, and workflows that makes it easy for you to get started. And you'll notice this is a trend in most business applications that you can get out of Office 365 today is a set of reusable set of functionality that you can implement quickly in your environment without having to go through a separate infrastructure overhead or a hosting overhead for that functionality. So SharePoint Online, if you're using it today, you may have already noticed that it shows up under your app listing as a SharePoint platform. When you first click on it, it takes you to all your commonly visited sites for now. And I'm going to go into our Doc homepage here. So if you've used SharePoint in the past, you'll see that this looks nothing like SharePoint. It looks completely different, and that's intentional, right? We've customized the look and feel, but more importantly, this is still all under Office 365. We're utilizing an Office 365 service like SharePoint and using that as a intranet portal for the rest of the employees, and with some neat functionality such as if you use multiple applications and a custom ERP system, perhaps here's a My Tools section that they can use to quickly launch their own applications. Chances are there's a lot of influx of information that might be in multiple repositories in the organization, and if there's a new employee and they just want to see, hey, what's the policies and procedure? What if I just wanted to look up someone's phone number? My computer's having an issue. I just like to submit a help desk ticket, or I'd like to submit a time off request. So rather than sending out emails and having to memorize where everything is, the answer is to, hey, just go to your Doc instance and either search for it, or you can find it directly on the platform. Now you'll notice that while I'm talking about SharePoint here, there's quite a bit of integration on how we are pulling this off. So for example, The Let's Celebrate area is utilizing anniversaries and new hire information, where these information could be coming from an Active Directory field that's synced to Azure. So we are kind of using Office 365 and Azure profile information here. Upcoming events can come from shared calendars from Outlook and Exchange Online. So you can see kind of how that's being integrated here. We talked about employee directory, a simple way to look up employee information, phone numbers, and things of that nature. And if I'm trying to find someone very specific here, I can type this in and find a specific person, but as I hover my mouse around it, showing me additional metadata of that user. And these are not typical information that you find in a user profile, right? So let's go to the source here, and I click on View Profile. Now I'm being taken to an entirely different Office 365 service, which is Delve. It's kind of like a my profile kind of a page, like a personalized profile page for each user. And there are some templated information like their email address and phone number and the documents they're working on. And a commonly asked feature request is for an organization tree. And this is an org chart that also shows the direct reports, other employees that might be peers to someone you're trying to find, that kind of thing. But it's also got About Me and other sections which may not be in your identity store, such as Active Directory, but it allows the user optionally fill out additional information about themselves to create a better collaboration space. And we kind of jump from a SharePoint instance to a Delve instance from the same location here. And you'll notice that pattern in many custom-built or line of business applications from third-party vendors on how it's using different sets of functionality to together create a more seamless experience, right? Let's look at something else, an employee resources page. Another key use case, so if you're on Office 365 and let's say you're already using some of the out-of-the-box functionality like forms or groups, in fact, the next logical question might be, well, how do we make sure that everyone's aware of it? And so you can kind of store, have a one-stop location for things you'd consider like a employee resources area. So an IT help desk ticket, it might be an IT item that you could technically put under like an IT area or an IT department, but submitting a travel request might be more of in the HR space. So rather than split functionality that an end user might commonly be asking for, why not put everything under one umbrella and use multiple Office 365 service offerings to tie everything together? So this is while this is not a SharePoint demo or anything, it's a quick use case to kind of showcase how utilizing an Office 365 service, we have customized it to our specific needs. So you only have department sites that's specific to your need. If you only have one office, then you don't need a locations area. If you're not a project-focused company, you can add or remove that feature. But by and large, all of the functionality here is powered by one or more Office 365 features. And that's kind of the value of maximizing the service offering, is not looking at a tool in isolation, but looking at a business problem and trying to figure out which tool and in what way can, or which combination of tools can together solve a problem. We will talk about Power BI in just a second, but since we're here, I figured I'll show it anyway. Power BI is technically a separate offering from Microsoft, where you can connect to existing data. So if you've got lists in SharePoint or a database on your local system, you can surface that information, create a dashboard or report in Power BI, and use SharePoint to share the information ultimately. So again, another example of using the data model to surface the data onto the cloud using Power BI, which is a business intelligence platform to build dashboards and reports using SharePoint Online to effectively share that information so you can embed it onto pages and other areas of the site, and effectively using Office 365 and SharePoint groups and permissions to manage security of who gets to see what report can be managed directly on this page here without having to utilize a separate identity store. So that's probably a lot to take in, and if you got questions, feel free to ask away. But I figured it's a good way to demonstrate how we can take advantage of multiple services to solve a unique problem and also effectively share that. Another item might be Yammer, and Yammer is effectively Microsoft's answer to a enterprise social collaboration space. If you haven't used Yammer in the past, I do want to make you aware of it very quickly. And it's not as widely used, but it is gaining traction in certain areas where if the whole concept of enterprise social in and of itself is gaining traction. And Yammer is a great way to keep the enterprise social focus within your data space. So it's a common theme to hear that in any given organization, the employees can kind of band together and create their own Facebook groups or other social collaboration platforms to share company information or scheduling, that kind of thing, which might be scary in some cases, especially if you're in a regulated industry. So if rather than fight that, the better model may be to, well, let's embrace it by storing that information within our secure platform and allowing employees a controlled environment, but also giving features that are available in more modern platforms like Facebook or any kind of a group-based collaboration engines that's out there. Yammer is a good answer to most of that question. And again, if you've noticed, I can also embed Yammer feeds like a Yammer wall into a SharePoint page and have a single environment, again, connecting that information. So this doesn't have to be a whole page. It could be part of a page or at the bottom of a page. So you can have, if you're discussing a project, you can have all the project information right up at the top. But if you have a quick question, have a Yammer feed at the bottom to act as kind of like a knowledge base or a frequently asked questions kind of a repository at the bottom, or to initiate a discussion. So probably way too high level for Yammer. It's the Microsoft Enterprise Social Collaboration tool. Depending on your licensing, you may or may have access to this feature, although Yammer is included in most Office 365 offering. Not going to talk about Office 365 groups a whole lot much, except that Office 365 groups it's kind of like the distribution list era of Exchange, but enhanced, where effectively you can create a group and it can be reused across multiple products and also have a shared inbox. What might be more interesting is the Microsoft Teams platform that's been out for a while, but it's been previewed for a while, but now it's going live. And Microsoft Teams is effectively answering the age-old question of, now that we have all the centralized collaboration hubs as well as all the applications to choose from, what if I just wanted to create a simple user store, right? If I have a 5-man team, I'm going to work on a project. I just want a simple space where I can chat with my peers, share some documents without going through a bunch of channels or getting a site set up, getting approval from IT, and that kind of stuff. Instead, you can use the new Microsoft Teams software to quickly and easily create a group and band together with a set of employees, and it's available as a desktop app as well as a mobile app. So you can carry the experience wherever you go, but still have the familiar look and feel of any commonly accessed chat resources kind of thing. So here's one of our group all created on Office 365 here. And this is the Microsoft Team desktop software. And I can chat, I can get a list of activities, I can handle my meetings, share files. And this is kind of, again, banding together multiple Office 365 features under one umbrella. So for example, files here is stored in SharePoint. OneNote is a OneNote book that's also stored in SharePoint, but you can also open directly in your desktop version as well. So Microsoft Teams, think of it as the new way to create a kind of like a distribution list of users and have the ability to collaborate for smaller groups. Teams is not really meant for large departments or sharing information across hundreds of users because it can get overwhelming. But Teams does a good job of connecting other Office 365 services under a unified space. Office 365 Video and Stream is more straightforward. You must have already heard of Office 365 Video, which is the ability to create channels within your own organization and create like a YouTube channel, create a private channel that cannot be accessed from outside of your organization store. It's private to your organization. You can have security as far as who can see what, and have corporate videos embedded, like training videos and things of that nature on under Office 365. Stream is a relatively new service. It's if you've ever used any or participated in a live stream session like Twitch.tv or anything similar to that, Stream effectively allows you to create company-wide broadcasts and in a live area, giving the employees the ability to dynamically interact with that session, and also collaborate and automatically save the stream video onto like a SharePoint environment to be viewed later. This is great for if your organization does monthly corporate presentations, or if the CEO, the president of the organization, would like to reach out, once a year, half an year, kind of a session that requires participation from, as a fair number of employees, or things like town hall sessions. It's a great way to stream that information for in the case where everyone may not be able to make it in person. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about this. You know that most of Office 365 services is mobile first, so you can gain access to it on any kind of mobile devices as well as Mac. We talked about Dell, which is a Office 365 solution to storing, creating like a user profile area for creating a profile around users where you can see all metadata relative to that user, including their documents, information they've elected to share, such as about me and the projects they're working on, as well as showing a summary of documents that they're working with, team members that they're most likely working with, so you can kind of get a better sense and feel of what they're working on. And if you're a fellow team member, you can probably gain access to documents if you don't know where something is simply by looking at their Dell profile. We talked about Power BI, but I also wanted to mention that BI in and of itself, you can also create reports and models within Excel and upload that into SharePoint. You can also use Excel to digest information, or use a Power BI desktop to model your data, create visualization, and then use Office 365 to effectively share that information and collaborate on it. I do have a Power BI demo session, but I think we're not going to have time to get to it. So I'm just going to go through some of the other services that I wanted to bring to your attention. The new Microsoft Compliance Center, I think I have it 2 slides over. There we go. Is kind of relatively new. If you haven't used it already, it is the one-stop shop for all types of DLP mechanisms and other tools under one area. This used to be decentralized and put into multiple places, but now you can just go into the Security and Compliance Center and have a single dashboard to create things like a DLP rule. So for example, if I just wanted to create a policy that said you can't store any documents or send emails containing social security information, I can do that. And there's all kinds of templates built in. For this one example that talked about, it's the USPI data information automatically finds and masks things like social security numbers. So, and it's smart enough to know that if it's a phone number or a SSN or is part of a template. So if you typed in something that resembles an SSN information, you can effectively block that document if it's in a Word document from being saved into SharePoint or OneDrive. And you can also use this to block that piece of information from being sent over your Exchange Online. And DLP is one of the several capabilities that's automatically built in. And you can use create DLP policies or governance policies and use the Compliance Center to gain dashboard of issues raised in the last week and issues that's been resolved and false positives or early matching. So if DLP flagged a document as potentially sensitive, but it was a mistake and you approved it anyway, you can see all these kinds of items here. If you're a regulated industry, you can create governance models yourself or custom governance models by yourself and combine that with the new sensitive information types. There's about, I think, 80 or so of them. These are pre-built information types such as SSN or even phone number if you consider that as to be too private to share, or your driver's license number, all that kind of templated stuff. You can combine these templates under labels or add under a DLP policy to work together to mask certain content. And e-discovery is perhaps more of one of the obscure features because it's housed or used to be housed under SharePoint. It allows you to find information in the event of an audit. We don't have time to get into this. I'm going to just glance over this. Unless there's anyone interested who would like to learn more about e-discovery, I can show you a quick demo. We already talked about DLP policy areas, and one thing I may have missed is also rights management services, which is built into both SharePoint and Office 365, where you can use the DLP capabilities in Office. So if you secure a Word document as a restricted document, and even if you download and attempt to share it, including on a USB drive, you can't open that document until you authenticate with Office 365 or Azure Rights Management. So you can have end-to-end security without fear of users downloading information or sharing by enabling right management services or information rights management, also called IRM, directly in Office 365 and securing a document. And you can be rest assured that it's encrypted. For them to view the document, they need a valid credential within your Office 365 center. The encryption works in conjunction with remote management services, rights management services and DLP policies. So you can kind of have end-to-end encryption or restrictions on Office documents or information. So I know I was kind of all over the place here because I was just trying to think about not commonly used features that you just kind of, at least as at an overview, you can see that these things do exist. And obviously there's not enough information in this webinar for you to just straight up start using it, but the point here is so that you're aware of it and you can use the information gained here to explore for yourself and see if can be a potential solution for some of your business needs that you're exploring today. That being said, I'm going to close out for questions. But for those who don't have any questions, thank you for being a part of this webinar. You will receive a copy of this presentation deck if you'd like to explore it further. But if you've got any questions, feel free to ask away.
If anybody has any questions, you can type them into the chat window, or you can hit that raise hand button and we can pass the mic over to you and let you guys ask any questions you have. Okay, so we're getting radio silence from you guys, so I'm going to start wrapping up because we're just past noon here. If anybody does have any questions, please feel free to send me an email. You should all have my email address, but if not, I'm typing it in right now in the chat window. Please feel free to send me an email with any questions or any features that you want to learn about. Like Rahul said, you'll get an email from us a little later this afternoon. We'll have the recording of this webinar along with the slides from Rahul. So if nobody else has any questions or anything, I'm going to wrap up. Thanks very much for joining us. Rahul, thanks very much for your presentation. It was so informative. And that's about it.
Absolutely. Thank you everyone for joining. Have a good rest of the day.
Have a great day, everybody.